There's this thing that happens when you've been living a certain way for so long, you start to believe that this is just the way life works. That there's no other path, no other option. And that's exactly where I was. Trapped in my own little bubble. A belief bubble, I guess you could call it. When I first started my career, I was filled with ambition. I was hungry for success. And not just the get-by kind of success. I wanted the big stuff. The money. The recognition. The corner office. The lifestyle. I was chasing it all, the dream, the status, the high-paying job, the fancy dinners, the travel. I convinced myself that if I could just keep climbing, keep pushing, everything else would fall into place. That was the bubble I created for myself. I had the perfect setup, a good job, a decent paycheck, a comfortable home. I had a beautiful wife, Emily, who supported me no matter what. But the more I built my career, the more I started to believe that this chasing of success, was the only thing that mattered. Emily had always been understanding, but I don't think she knew the depth of my belief. How every morning, I'd wake up already thinking about the meetings, the emails, the deadlines. How, when we'd sit down for dinner, I'd be checking my phone every 5 minutes, just in case something came up at work. How, when I wasn't working, I was thinking about work. Always. But here's the thing, I wasn't doing it just for me. I was doing it for us, for our future. At least, that's what I told myself. I told myself that if I worked harder, worked longer, if I gave everything I had to my job, then we would have the future we always dreamed of. I'd bring in more money. We'd go on better vacations. I'd give her everything she ever wanted. I'd prove that I could be the man who could provide for her. But I didn't realize something at the time, something that, looking back now, seems so obvious. I thought success was a destination. I thought it was about achieving more, getting more, becoming more. I thought it was about hitting a target, crossing a finish line, and saying I made it. But I was wrong. I had been living in this belief bubble that success was linear. That it was just a series of steps to climb. One after the other, and eventually you'd reach the top and everything would be perfect. But what I didn't understand then was that life wasn't about climbing to the top. It wasn't about reaching some elusive, unattainable peak of success that you could wave a flag over and say, I've made it. In fact, the more I climbed, the more I realized I wasn't actually getting anywhere at all. I was just spinning in place. The problem with the bubble was that I thought I had it all figured out. Every time something new came my way, an opportunity, a promotion, a new project, I jumped at it. I had to take it. The belief was so ingrained in me that I didn't even question it. I didn't ask myself, is this really what I want? Is this really the life I'm building? Instead, I was always thinking about what more I could do, what more I could achieve. I was always looking for the next thing, the next milestone, the next success. And the thing is, when you're always looking for the next thing, you stop noticing what's in front of you. I remember one night Emily said, "You don't even hear me anymore, Jake." She had this sad, tired look in her eyes, one I had seen a million times before, but had never truly seen until then. I remember brushing it off, telling her I was just tired, that I had a lot on my plate. I said I was doing it for us, for our future. But deep down, I knew I wasn't there. Not really. I wasn't present for her. I wasn't present for our life. I had created a belief system that success meant sacrifice. Sacrifice of time, sacrifice of my own happiness, sacrifice of the life I was supposed to be living in the moment. And I didn't even realize it was happening. I had gotten into this trap where I felt like I had to constantly prove myself. Every success, every achievement, was like a validation, a checkmark that confirmed that I was worthy, that I was good enough. I didn't stop to think about the toll it was taking. I didn't stop to ask myself, is this the life I want to look back on? Emily started pointing out how much I had changed. You used to be fun, she said. We used to laugh and do things together. Now, all you care about is your work. She was right. I didn't see it at the time, but I wasn't the man she married anymore. I had become so consumed with the idea of success that I had let it consume me. My belief bubble was suffocating me, but I couldn't see it. I had convinced myself that my worth came from external achievements. I had made the mistake of thinking that if I could just hit the right goals, I'd finally feel like I was enough. But I was wrong. I was chasing something that was never going to fulfill me. It wasn't about the job. It wasn't about the promotions, or the fancy office, or the recognition. What mattered, the thing I had completely overlooked, was the people I loved and the time I spent with them. What I had failed to see was that I wasn't going to reach a point where everything felt perfect. The perfect life wasn't going to come from climbing the ladder of success. It was going to come from living a life where I was truly present. A life where I didn't sacrifice everything else for work. The belief bubble I had been living in, this idea that more was always better, that achievement defined me, that my career was the most important thing, had made me blind to the one thing that actually mattered. It wasn't until that moment, the moment when Emily looked at me with that tired, broken expression, that I began to question everything I had believed. I started to wonder, what if I've been wrong all along? And that's when I realized, the bubble wasn't just about success. It was about the choices I had made, and the price I had paid. And it was time to burst that bubble before I lost everything I had. I remember the first time I felt that creeping sense of doubt. It wasn't a big, dramatic moment, but a quiet realization that something wasn't quite right. I had just gotten another promotion at work. I thought it would make me feel accomplished, but instead, it felt empty. I came home late that night, like I always did, and Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I tried to brush it off. I told myself, she's tired. She'll snap out of it. It's just a phase. Once I get this project done, once we hit this milestone, things will get better. But in the back of my mind, something didn't sit right. At the time, I didn't understand it. I thought that if I kept working hard, if I kept pushing for more, everything would eventually come together. I told myself that once we had enough money, once I secured that financial cushion, we'd be able to relax, take vacations, enjoy life. But the truth was, I was losing the very thing I had been trying to build all along. I was losing Emily. I couldn't see it then. I was blinded by my own ambition, my desire to achieve this perfect version of success. I told myself, just a little more, just a little longer, and then everything will be fine. But the truth was, I was losing something even more important than my job or my salary. I was losing my connection with her. As time passed, things didn't get better. In fact, they got worse, but in ways I couldn't even recognize at first. Emily wasn't mad at me, not in the traditional sense. She didn't yell at me or throw a tantrum. But there was a shift. The little things started to slip away. We didn't laugh together anymore. We didn't talk about our dreams or our plans the way we used to. I came home late from work more often than not, and when I did, it was like we were two strangers living in the same house. I thought, maybe she's just going through something. She's stressed with her own work, maybe she just needs some space. So I gave her space. I told myself it would pass, that things would get better once the business slowed down. Once I had more time for us. But it didn't get better. It got quieter. I'll never forget the night I came home after another late meeting. Emily was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, reading a book. I asked her how her day was, but she just shrugged and said, it was fine. That was it. She didn't ask about my day. She didn't ask how the meeting went, or if I was okay. She just didn't seem to care anymore. And that's when I realized something wasn't right. But I still didn't know what. I kept telling myself that I was doing this for us. I was doing this so we could have the life we both wanted. I told myself, just a little more time, a little more sacrifice, and things will get back to normal. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to admit it, but I was already losing her in ways I couldn't reverse, and I was too focused on my own goals to see it. The wake-up call came one evening when Emily sat me down. She wasn't upset. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. Tired of waiting. tired of pretending. She looked at me and said, "Jake, I'm not sure I can do this anymore. I don't think I'm in this relationship the way I used to be." It took me a moment to process what she was saying. I was stunned. I tried to explain myself. I tried to tell her that I was doing this for us, that I was working so hard so we could have everything we wanted. But that wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want a bigger house. She didn't want more money. She didn't want the perfect future. She just wanted me to be here. And that's when the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I had spent so much time building a future, building a career, chasing some idea of success, that I had completely neglected the present. I wasn't there for her. I wasn't the man I used to be, the one who would listen, who would care, who would make time for her no matter how busy I was. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was so busy trying to secure our future, I was tearing apart our present. I had been chasing success, thinking it would fix everything, but all it did was make things worse. I wasn't the man Emily needed. I wasn't the husband I promised to be. Sometimes life doesn't hit you with a soft nudge or a gentle whisper. It doesn't give you time to think, to prepare. It punches you in the gut when you least expect it, leaving you breathless and disoriented. That's exactly what happened to me one morning, except this wasn't a figurative punch. It was as real and physical as it gets. I had been on autopilot for so long, caught up in the endless cycle of work, meetings, and keeping it together that I didn't even see it coming. Emily had been telling me for weeks that I was too distant, too absent. She said I was just going through the motions, but I always brushed it off, told myself we'd be fine. After all, what's a few late nights, a few missed dinners? The bigger picture mattered, didn't it? If I kept pushing for the future would be better for both of us. I couldn't have been more wrong. That morning, I woke up feeling a little off, nothing unusual. Just the kind of sluggishness that comes with a heavy schedule. I kissed Emily goodbye as she was getting ready for work, but there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite place. She had this look, like she was holding something back, but I couldn't stop to think about it. I had a meeting that was starting in 10 minutes, and I couldn't be late, so I left. Just like that. Without a second thought. It wasn't until I was halfway down the road that I realized I'd forgotten my phone at home. Normally, I'd have gone back for it, but that day, for whatever reason, I didn't. I didn't think I needed it. My day was planned. And that was my first mistake. Around mid-morning, my boss called me. He needed something urgent. I missed the call. No big deal, right? I'd call him back as soon as I could. I had a presentation coming up, and I was focused on that. When I checked my email a little later, there were dozens of unread messages. Work emails, client requests, reminders of deadlines I'd already missed. I felt this surge of stress rising in my chest, the kind of pressure that only 1,000 things left undone can bring. I had been here before. I had always been here before. The constant need to catch up, the constant anxiety about falling behind, the nagging feeling that I wasn't enough, not enough for my team, not enough for the job, not enough for Emily. And then, at that exact moment, I got another call. It was from the hospital. Emily had been in an accident. My heart stopped. I remember feeling like everything around me went still. I couldn't hear anything. The voice on the other end was speaking, but I couldn't understand a word. I don't even know how I made it to the hospital. It's all a blur. I don't remember driving there, just the adrenaline, the panic, the fear that gripped me like a vice. When I got to the hospital, I found out it wasn't as serious as I feared, thank God. She had slipped on the stairs at work, bruising her leg pretty badly and needing some stitches on her forehead. But the doctors reassured me she'd be fine. They said she just needed rest and a few days off her feet. But it didn't matter that Emily was going to be okay. What mattered was the realization that hit me like a tidal wave when I walked into that room and saw her lying there, groggy and hurt. I wasn't there for her. I hadn't been there for her. The only thing I had been thinking about all morning was work. I hadn't even noticed that she'd been struggling with something as simple as a fall down the stairs, something that could have been much worse. I wasn't even present enough to hear her when she said she needed me. She needed me that morning. She needed me the week before. She had needed me for months, and I had been too consumed with my career to see it. When I walked into that hospital room, I saw something in Emily's eyes that I will never forget. It wasn't fear or pain. It was something deeper, a quiet resignation. Like she had given up expecting me to show up. And that look, shattered me. In that moment, I realized how much I had neglected her. I had let work come first. I had let ambition, deadlines, and career success become more important than the woman I loved. I had become so obsessed with securing our future, with making more money and getting ahead in my career, that I had forgotten that our future didn't matter without the present. Our connection didn't matter if I wasn't showing up for her now. I sat next to her, holding her hand as she rested. She was quiet for a long time, her eyes closed. I wanted to apologize, to say all the things I should have said, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I sat there in silence. And I let the guilt wash over me, because it was deserved. But something else was there too. I felt this sharp, clear understanding of the cost of my neglect, the cost of my absence. It was more than just the missed moments. It was the erosion of trust, of connection, of intimacy. I had built a life around work, around goals, around achievements, and I had neglected the very foundation that made all of it worthwhile. That was the moment I realized something had to change. No more excuses. No more tomorrow. I needed to be here for Emily. I needed to be here for us. And I needed to make that change now. I spent the next few hours just sitting by Emily's side, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I thought about how I could change. How I could finally start being the person she needed me to be. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew it would take time. But the first step was clear. I had to stop thinking about the future all the time. I had to start living in the present. When Emily woke up later, I promised her something. It wasn't a promise to be perfect. It wasn't a promise to fix everything overnight. But it was a promise that I would show up. I would be present. I would be the man she needed, not the man I had been pretending to be. And in that moment, I realized that I had to start with myself. Because if I didn't show up for me, I couldn't show up for anyone else. That was my wake-up call. The kind that doesn't just knock you down, it forces you to look at everything you've been avoiding. The kind that makes you realize that, sometimes, the hardest thing isn't changing the world, it's changing yourself. And in that moment, I made a decision. I was going to fight for this life. I was going to fight for Emily. And I was going to fight for the man I wanted to become, not the man I had let ambition define. That conversation with Emily changed everything for me. I had no idea how to fix it. I didn't know how to go back to what we had, or if that was even possible anymore. I felt like I had let her down in the worst way. But I also knew one thing: I had a choice to make. I could keep going down the same path, convincing myself that things would eventually work out, or I could wake up and face the reality of what was happening. And that's when I decided to make a change. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a sudden miracle, but slowly, I started rethinking everything I had believed about success and happiness. I started realizing that the life I wanted, the life I was really after, wasn't about money, status, or milestones. It was about love, connection, and being present. And I had neglected that for too long. I had to relearn what it meant to be there for Emily. To truly be there. To listen, to understand, to give her my time, my attention, my presence. Because in the end, the biggest lesson I learned was that success in any area of life means nothing if you don't have the people you love beside you, sharing it. And that's where I went wrong. After that conversation with Emily, I felt like I was walking through a fog. She had said the words that I knew deep down were true, but hearing them aloud still hit me harder than I could have imagined. I'm not sure I'm in this anymore. Those words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake them. But I also couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The truth was, I had been so wrapped up in the idea of success, the house, the job, the money, that I had stopped paying attention to what mattered most: Emily. Our relationship. Our connection. It wasn't an easy realization to come to. In fact, it was painful. I thought back to the times when we were happy, before all the late nights, before I got caught up in the rat race. I remembered how we used to talk for hours about our hopes and dreams, how we'd laugh over silly things, how we'd sit together at the end of the day, content with just being in each other's company. Where had all that gone? I began to see how much I had taken Emily for granted. It wasn't just the big moments that mattered, it was the little ones. The morning coffees we used to share, the quiet walks after dinner, the way we would hold hands when we watched TV. Those were the moments that made our relationship strong. Those were the moments that had been slipping away, unnoticed for so long. I knew that I had to change. But change is hard. Especially when you've been living a certain way for so long. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep going on like this. I couldn't lose her, and I couldn't lose myself in the process. Rebuilding a relationship isn't something that happens overnight. I think that's what I expected. After all, I was good at fixing problems. I could fix a broken faucet. I could negotiate a tough deal. I could plan a strategy to grow my career. But relationships? They don't work like that. There's no quick fix. The first step was actually listening. Really listening. I sat down with Emily and asked her what she needed from me. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to justify myself or tell her why I had been so busy. I was just there, listening to her feelings, her frustrations, her fears. And she told me something that completely shifted my perspective. I don't need you to be perfect, Jake. I don't need you to solve everything. I just need you to be here. I need you to show up. I need to feel like you care, about me, about us, about this life we're building together. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so focused on achieving things for the future that I had forgotten how to be present in the now. I had ignored the most important part of our relationship, her. I had been living for the future, but Emily needed me in the present. So, I started small. I started with the little things. I stopped working late every night. I made a commitment to leave the office on time and actually be home when I said I would be. I stopped checking emails at dinner. I put my phone down when we were together and gave her my full attention. I made sure that every day, I took a moment to connect with her, whether it was over a cup of coffee, a walk after dinner, or just sitting together in silence. I didn't expect things to magically fix themselves. But slowly, I began to see the difference. Slowly, Emily began to open up again. We started talking more, laughing more, even arguing sometimes. But it felt real, like we were living our life again, not just going through the motions. But the most important change. I started to feel like I was finally living the life I had been chasing all along. Not a perfect life, but a real one. A life where love, connection, and being present were at the center of everything. I thought I had it all figured out. I had made the decision to stop chasing the idea of success that society had shoved down my throat. I had committed to Emily, to our relationship, to being present. Things were starting to feel right again. But life has a funny way of testing you when you think you're on the right track. And that test came in the form of an opportunity one never saw coming. One Thursday afternoon, my boss called me into his office. I thought it was going to be just another meeting about the projects I was working on. But when I walked in, I saw that he had a big smile on his face, like he was about to hand me a golden ticket. He sat me down and told me that there was an opening for a senior management position, one that would require a major relocation, more responsibility, and a hefty pay raise. It was everything I had been working for the last 15 years, the promotion I had dreamed about, the recognition I had craved, the title that would finally place me in the circle of elite executives I had always admired. My heart raced. I had worked so hard for something like this. I had sacrificed so many hours, so much of myself, for this one moment. It was the culmination of everything I'd been building, everything I had been chasing. This was the moment where I would finally feel successful, validated, respected, admired. It was exactly the kind of opportunity one had been conditioned to want. And in a way, it felt like my dream was finally coming true. But as I sat there listening to my boss describe the benefits, the perks, the growth potential, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I thought about Emily. I thought about the promises I had made to her, the promises I had made to myself. I remembered the late nights, the missed anniversaries, the silence between us, the way I had let my career dominate our lives. I thought about how Emily had supported me through all of it, even when I wasn't present, even when I was too distracted by my ambition to notice the cracks in our relationship. And then it hit me. This promotion, this opportunity, it would mean more of the same. More late nights. More travel. More distance. It would mean that the promises I had made to Emily would be broken again. It would mean falling back into the very trap I had just escaped from. I had been telling myself that I was done with that life, that I was done chasing an illusion of success that came at the expense of my personal happiness. But here I was, on the brink of throwing it all away for the very thing I had sworn I would leave behind. I was torn. I knew that turning it down meant walking away from everything I had worked for in my career. It meant not living up to the expectations I had set for myself, and the expectations others had for me. But it also meant walking away from the very life I was starting to build with Emily, a life that was grounded in love, connection, and being present. It meant protecting what I had learned was most important, the relationship we had, the time we spent together, the simple moments of peace that we were starting to build. The dilemma felt suffocating. I could already feel the pressure mounting in my chest. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall in one direction or the other. I had worked so hard for this. It was what I had always wanted, what I had been told I should want. But when I really looked at the situation, I realized something profound. I was being asked to choose between the life I had always believed I wanted and the life that was actually going to make me happy. And to my surprise, they weren't the same life. I took the rest of the day off. I needed space. I needed time to think. That night, when I got home, Emily was sitting on the couch, her eyes tired from a long day of work. She glanced up when I walked in, and I could tell she could sense something was wrong. I didn't even have to say anything. The tension between us was thick, almost tangible. After a long silence, she spoke. "What's going on, Jake? You've been distant all day." I could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I took a deep breath and sat down beside her, not sure where to begin. And I told her everything. I told her about the promotion, about the relocation, about all the perks and opportunities it came with. I told her about the way my boss had looked at me, how excited he was, how proud he was to offer me something so significant. But then I told her the truth, the part one hadn't fully admitted to myself. I told her about how conflicted I felt. How I was terrified that taking the job would pull me back into the very life I had promised I would leave behind. How, as much as I wanted to take it, how much it seemed like the right thing to do in my career, it wasn't the life I wanted anymore. Not the life I wanted with her. There was a long pause. Emily didn't say anything at first. She just stared ahead, as if she were processing everything I had just told her. I could see the wheels turning in her head. I could see the concern in her eyes. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Jake, I love you. You know that, right? But I need you to choose us. I need you to choose this, us, over the career you've been chasing. I don't need a perfect life. I don't need a big house or a fancy vacation. I just need you here with me. I need you to show up, every day, like you've been doing lately. That's all I want. That's all I've ever wanted." And in that moment I knew what I had to do. I had spent so much of my life chasing the wrong things, thinking that success would fix everything. But now, I understood that the success I truly craved, the success that would actually make me happy, wasn't in titles or promotions or recognition. It was in being present, in being there for the people I loved. And that included Emily. I didn't even hesitate. I called my boss the next morning and turned the promotion down. It wasn't easy, and I could feel the weight of that decision. But in my heart, I knew it was the right one. I knew that the life I had built with Emily, the life I had started to rediscover, was more valuable than any promotion could ever be. And I realized that this was my test, not just to see if I could let go of my old ambitions, but to see if I could fully embrace the life I had once overlooked. To see if I could let go of the chase for external validation and choose a life based on love, presence, and real connection. It wasn't a decision between career success and failure. It was a decision between two very different lives. And in the end, I chose the one where I could truly live. Turning down that promotion wasn't easy, not by a long shot. I felt a lump in my throat as I dialed the number to my boss and explained that I couldn't accept the offer. Part of me was waiting for him to convince me otherwise, for him to say the magic words that would get me back into that hustle mindset. But those words didn't come. And as soon as the call ended, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, as if I'd just made a decision that, deep down, I had been avoiding for a long time. It was terrifying. For years, my worth had been tied to what I achieved. I had defined myself by the things I could measure: my salary, my title, the deals I closed. It was how I kept score. So, walking away from all of that, it felt like I was letting go of a part of my identity. But in that moment, I realized that the identity I had built up around my career wasn't really me. It was a version of myself that I had created to fit into a box of societal expectations. And I wasn't sure I wanted to fit into that box anymore. But it wasn't just about stepping away from the career I had worked so hard to build. It was about reconnecting with the life I had been neglecting. Emily. Our life. Us. I started by sitting down with Emily and having a real conversation. We talked about everything: the good and the bad, the past, and what we both wanted for the future. I wasn't just telling her what I thought she wanted to hear anymore. I was listening. I really heard her when she said that she didn't need me to be perfect. She didn't need me to be this high-powered, overworked guy. She just wanted me to be here. She wanted us to have a relationship where we lived together, not just existed together. And that's when I made a promise to myself, and to her, that I would never lose sight of what was truly important again. I realized I had been so focused on achieving things for our future that I had completely neglected the present. But the truth is, the future is built on today, on the moments we share, on the love and attention we give each other in the here and now. You can't bank on tomorrow if you haven't invested in today. I started making changes. And those changes weren't big, dramatic gestures. They were small, everyday choices. Like the way I started setting boundaries at work, carving out time for Emily and for myself. Like how I left my phone in another room when we had dinner together so I could actually talk to her. How I began asking her about her day, not just as a formality, but because I genuinely wanted to know how she felt, what she was thinking. It wasn't just about spending time together, it was about quality time. We'd started having more real conversations, about what was bothering us, about our dreams for the future, but also about the simple, mundane things that made us laugh. I found myself looking forward to those quiet evenings, sitting on the couch together with no agenda other than being with each other. And as we began to rebuild that connection, something surprising happened. I started feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I stopped measuring my success by promotions or paychecks. I started measuring it by the love I gave, the moments I shared, and the relationships I nurtured. I started realizing that success wasn't about external validation, it was about feeling whole in the moment. And I realized that I had been chasing a version of success that was fleeting and hollow. I also began to redefine what it meant to succeed in life. It wasn't just about providing, it wasn't about the bigger house, the car, or the fancy vacations. It was about being present, about being there for the people who matter most. It was about showing up every day, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. I had neglected that part of me for so long, the part that was capable of truly loving, of truly being with someone, not just beside them. I wanted Emily to see that I was there for her, that I saw her, that she mattered. And so, I made it my mission to show up. I didn't know if we could fix everything overnight. I didn't know if all the hurt could be undone in an instant. But I knew this: I had to try. I had to be better. For myself. For her. and for the life we still had the chance to build together. I started to see the difference in Emily too. She began to open up more. She smiled more. She laughed more. There was less tension between us, less silence. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't going to be perfect. But it felt real. And that was the most important thing. We both stopped trying to chase an impossible dream, and instead, we started living the dream we had right in front of us. I also started taking better care of myself. I realized I couldn't give the best of myself to Emily if I didn't take care of my own mental and physical well-being. So, I began making time for things that had nothing to do with work. A run in the morning, reading a book at night, taking care of my health. I didn't need to be the hardest worker in the room to be happy. I needed to be the healthiest, the most present version of myself. The changes weren't always easy, and there were times when I felt unsure. But slowly, day by day, I could feel Emily and I coming back to each other. There was a new sense of understanding between us. We started dreaming again, not about a perfect future, but about a future together. We talked about the places we wanted to travel, the house we could move into once our kids were out of the house, the hobbies we wanted to take up together. We were no longer living in the future. We were living right here, right now. And that was enough. In fact, it was more than enough. I realize now that life isn't about chasing after some unreachable finish line. It's about the moments you create with the people who matter most. It's about showing up for the ones you love, being present for the ones who need you, and letting go of the false idea that success means anything without the people you care about by your side. When I look back now, I can see how much I've changed. But more importantly, I see how much we've changed. And I'm not just talking about me and Emily. I'm talking about the relationship we built, the life we're building together. A life that's full of love, growth, and presence. It wasn't a perfect transformation, but it was the kind of transformation that matters. And I can honestly say now, for the first time in years, that I'm not just building a future. I'm living a life. And that's something I never realized I was missing until I finally woke up to what was really important.